Yes, that's exactly what it was in a semiotic. Not because he answered first and I was happy about someone liking the paper. Okay, this is Existential Aesthetics in the Journal of Aesthetics and Art Criticism. Does he have a first badge? Oh, you think because you paid money that makes you good? Wow. Wow. Very capitalist of you. I mean, Cinecem X, why don't you be a streamer and then I could shout you out? I mean, you probably would have a pretty good stream because you know what you're actually doing when it comes to video. Okay. So, here we go. Yeah, one of these days we'll get Cinesemiac streaming and then we'll have another, we can have like, philosophy of, we'll have like film discussions and stuff. Okay. Art in a certain kind of aesthetic practice or aesthetic experience can be of existential importance to people. Reading a particular novel may change a person's life. A painting or film can trigger an epiphany and turns one's values upside down. Engaging in some aesthetic practice may give meaning to one's existence and have profoundly therapeutic effect. One may grow to love, in the fullest sense of the word, a certain song or a beautiful natural landscape. A hike in the woods or a concert can count as one of the best and most cherished moments in one's life. Being a foodie, a punk, a jazz lover may be so important to a person as to be constitutive of their identity and so forth. The aim of what I propose to call existential aesthetics is to investigate and elucidate such experiences, practices, and effects from a philosophical perspective. Alright, did I read this? I'm afraid now. I don't think I did. Okay, whatever. I'm gonna read this anyway. Because we've read stuff along these lines, and it's probably why I saved it, but I was like, I don't know. Cool. Existential aesthetics is not yet a fully acknowledged sub-area of aesthetics in the way that environmental aesthetics or everyday aesthetics are. This is partly a matter of critical mass. Until rather recently, relatively few authors within the field of contemporary aesthetics would directly address the existential importance of art and aesthetics in their writing. But this is changing. There is now a growing body of scholarship that seeks to explore issues like the ones listed above. By bringing such work under one heading of existential aesthetics, the aim of this article is to improve our understanding of what is already happening in this area, draw attention to its significance, and facilitate further and more focused philosophical activity in this direction. And this is a good point. Once you actually get like a name and stuff, you can have a rallying cry or a flag that people can rally around. And this is something I had meant to do years ago, but I think, maybe the pandemic got in the way. But I actually wanted to petition Phil Papers to have a public philosophy category. And like, if anyone out there, like the other streamers or whatever, has ideas along these lines, I started writing up a proposal to send an email to Phil Papers. But like, I need more people to like get in on this, really, to say like who's like what sort of stuff is would fall under public philosophy in the Phil Papers category, because there's a lot of philosophy that goes on, but is it organized in a way, and how do people find this stuff? And that would be good. Thank you, Evolve Yourself. But like, it's actually a significant task to like organize a new concept of like an area of philosophy and how it interrelates with other stuff. And so I had forgotten about this. I should probably write it down. Let me write that down again because I haven't thought about it in a while. Yeah, so it's like one of these things that, there's the Twitch streamers, there are the bloggers, and there's all sorts of stuff, but like, it's not, Phil Papers could be used to, at least organize some of it. Like, I know there's only some academic research on public philosophy, but like there's a lot of we've read multiple papers on streaming during like the course of philosophy roulette, and like from in academic journals, those are papers on public philosophy, so like that could be cross-listed as a public philosophy work. Okay, so author starts now signposting. Section 1 provides a definition of existential aesthetics, while Section 2 seeks to delineate this emerging field from cognate areas of research. Section 3 and 4 explore various subcategories and examples of existential aesthetics. Section 5 seeks to identify important avenues for future research, and Section 6 presents some concluding thoughts about the potential of existential aesthetics and why philosophers should be encouraged to fulfill this potential. 1. Yeah, so this was accepted in June 4th, 2022. So this is, it may have been online, but it's really, there's a new article. Okay. Existential aesthetics is philosophical work that investigates the ways in which art and certain kinds of aesthetic practice or aesthetic experience can be of existential import to people. Let me unpack this definition. There are two ways in which works of art, aesthetic experiences, or certain aesthetic pursuits can acquire existential importance. 1. They can deeply and profoundly affect, of course, or qualify the course or quality of a person's life. 2. They can be existentially illuminating in addressing certain existential questions. 1. A work of art, an aesthetic experience, or an aesthetic practice may achieve such significance for a person that one can say, in a non-trivial and fundamental way, that one's life would not be or have been the same without it. For instance, falling in love with a film or a novel may be the start of a relation that lasts for decades and that changes the very fabric of your mental and emotional life. Engaging in some aesthetic practice, like painting or bird watching, may profoundly and unalterably shape who you are as a person. It may be part of what makes life worth living for you. Even a one-off aesthetic experience may shake you to your core and make you reevaluate some of the values and principles you hold dear. I'm trying to think if I've ever lost my mind at some art. I don't think so, but I've definitely remembered some things I quite liked and thought about them for a while. And just that little bit of a push to be thinking about one of these artworks for a while, as opposed to not thinking about the artwork or not thinking about anything or thinking about something else, that is going to shift your life, at least in some way. But of course, anything will. But the fact that it was that particular work of art means that you were affected by the art. Existential questions deal with the most fundamental concerns we have as human beings: how to face our own mortality, how to cope with the human condition, what makes life worth living. An existential crisis, one could say, occurs when such queries become particularly pressing, when people question whether their lives have meaning, value, or purpose, when people are desperate to make sense of their existence. In such situations, it can happen that a work of art creates clarity and provides guidance, or some form of aesthetic engagement may offer solace and comfort. As actor and filmmaker Ethan Hawke puts it in a recent interview, most people don't spend a lot of time thinking about poetry, right? They have a life to live, and they're not really concerned with Allen Ginsberg's poems or anybody's poems until their father dies. They go to a funeral, you lose a child, somebody breaks your heart, they don't love you anymore, and all of a sudden, you're desperate for making sense out of this life, and hey, has anyone ever felt this bad before? How did they come out of this cloud? Or the inverse, something great. You meet somebody and your heart explodes. You love them so much you can't even see straight. You know you're dizzy. Does anyone feel like this? Did anyone feel like this before? What is happening to me? And that's when art's not a luxury, it's actually sustenance. We need it. That's a nice quote from Ethan Hawke. I mean, I think I don't know if I'm right about this. I think Ethan Hawke also started the Purge movies, or he invested in them. Something like that. Made a bunch of money off of it. Okay. It should be clear that 1 and 2 often co-occur. Works of art can be so helpful in dealing with existential questions that they change the course of a person's life in a very fundamental way. But 1 and 2 can also be instantiated separately. A work of art may be existentially illuminating without therefore having a life-altering effect, for example by lending further credence to a view one already holds. Thus, a movie might illustrate and humanize certain existential quandaries in a way that one finds enlightening, but not to the extent that one can say that one's life would not be the same without it. For me, for instance, it has been the case with films like La Bonne Heure. I don't even know how to say French, I'm terrible. Or Another Year, which powerfully show how perfidious a naive and insouciant pursuit of happiness can be. Conversely, one can be instantiated without 2. One can develop a deep and lifelong attachment to a particular song, even if that song does not in any way address existential questions. Una Paloma Blanca by the George Baker selection plays a key role in the life of the main character in Sander Collard's Dutch something or other. Of course, it is likely that much of the art that is discussed in existential aesthetics will deal with existential themes like death, the meaning of life, suffering, loneliness, and alienation. Such works tend to speak to and acquire significance for people who are burdened with existential concerns. But it is important to note that existential aesthetics is not limited to the discussion of such works. Poems, novels, films, or paintings that have vital significance to people do not have to address such topics directly or even indirectly. I mean, you can love a song that doesn't have to mean anything, you just love the tune, and whatever reason is that could make you go, like, think differently. It's not even that hard. People fall in love with, like, musicians because of their songs. And, like, it may not be about anything, but, like, you get that, existential, like, attachment to them. So, do I have anything to say about this? It's like, I don't know if any new ground is here. It's just that what is the effect of art? It affects us. We know that. That's kind of the definition of art. Now, there's the question of how it does that. Now, this is sort of like, we're not going to answer that. We're just going to call this sort of like the magical theory of art. Art somehow does this. And how does it change us? Well, if it changes us significantly, that is some sort of magical change within us because it does some significant change to the person that would not have happened otherwise. So it's you have to wonder exactly how art is working here, but that it does is somewhat uncontroversial. We're just not going to explain it right here, which is okay. We don't need to explain how. We just need to know that it does. Okay. As existential aesthetics, it is philosophical work that investigates the various ways in which art and certain kinds of aesthetic practice or aesthetic experience can be of existential importance to people. In other words, existential aesthetics is a type of philosophical aesthetics. This comes with the expectation that contributions to existential aesthetics will adhere to the standards and norms of professional philosophy. Art critics, literary critics, and film scholars may also expound on existential themes contained in their objects of study, but only if their work is sufficiently philosophical in nature will it qualify as existential aesthetics. Similarly, essays in existential aesthetics may draw on personal experience and may take as their starting point an event or work that has been of personal significance to the author. But essays of this type will only count as existential aesthetics if they live up to the standards of professional philosophy. Existential aesthetics is not to be confused with confessional literature. Okay, so this person really thinks they're going to like start a new field of aesthetics and talking about how aesthetics affects philosophical ideas. Now, that's fine. You can talk about this. Now, the question is this separate from like aesthetics as it already was? I don't know. But like, I guess you could talk about things that affect people in terms of the meaning of life and what is that. So now the question is like compared to environmental aesthetics and others say like feminist aesthetics. I don't know. But like, why not at this point? Okay. There is bound to be some overlap between existential aesthetics and other sub-areas of debate in aesthetics. For instance, an essay on the existential significance of music can both be a contribution to existential aesthetics and the philosophy of music. This is what I mean, like, okay, so the person knows that this is where you're going to go. It's like, well, how different is it? Well, it's going to have overlap. Reflections on the rituals of mourning may sit at the intersection of everyday aesthetics and existential aesthetics, but overlaps of this sort are only to be expected. One finds them in all subdisciplines in philosophy, and they do not prevent existential aesthetics from having its own distinct identity, not to be subsumed under any other existing sub-area of aesthetics. The latter is important. You know, that's something like this, the rituals of mourning. Like, is there a aesthetics of, like, you know, grief? And that might be a question you could answer. And then what would be grief in terms of, like, falling into it? Well, everyday aesthetics, yes, grief is an everyday thing, but it is more than just, like, an everyday thing. Like, you can talk about the aesthetics of, like, you know, walking down the hall. That's not the same as grief. All right. Even though there are clear affinities between, say, existential aesthetics and everyday aesthetics, it would not be helpful to equate the two or to consider one a variant of the other. To begin with, existential aesthetics need not focus on everyday phenomena and will not, in fact, often focus directly on works of so-called high art. Equally, Essays in existential aesthetics can focus on existentially significant experiences of nature. By contrast, as one of the pioneers in everyday aesthetic states, in everyday aesthetics, we are thinking of aesthetics issues that are not connected closely with the fine arts or with the natural environment. Issues in everyday aesthetics may relate to interior decoration, personal appearance, workplace aesthetics, cooking, gardening, hobbies, and much of this will not have any existential import. For similar reasons, existential aesthetics cannot be subsumed under environmental aesthetics or aesthetics of art. I mean, yeah, if you're going to focus on things that are falling under existentialism, then that's existentialism. Then you're going to be talking about those things that have existential stuff to existentialism. Insofar as existentialism is a somewhat well-defined area, I mean, that's exactly what you're going to have aesthetics of. So, I mean, I'm not like, that's like, it's just going to, be as far as existentialism goes, so goes existential aesthetics. Moreover, it is important to distinguish existential aesthetics from public philosophy. Hey! Give a little wave. Essays in existential aesthetics will, by definition, address topics that are not exclusively of academic interest, but they are not necessarily aimed at the general public or at a very broad audience. They may be written in an accessible style, jargon-free style, but this is not a prerequisite. Existential aesthetics is part and parcel of the academic discipline of philosophical aesthetics, and so contributions to existential aesthetics can be straightforwardly academic in nature. I mean, this is, I think, just falling under so goes the aesthetics with the existentialism. You can have popular existential works, but there's plenty of academic existential writing too. And it doesn't have to be public, in the public philosophy sense of it. Work in public philosophy may, of course, focus on topics and themes that have existential significance for people, but this need not be the case. Any subject, debate, or sub-area in philosophy can, in principle, be picked up in public philosophy. In contemporary aesthetics, for instance, the ontology of art, the definition of art, and the nature of depiction are three of the most widely discussed topics. They could become the subject of a podcast, blog post, video essay, or some other form of public philosophy, even though discussions of this sort will rarely have a connection to existential concerns. Okay, fine, whatever. Finally, existential aesthetics is not to be confused with existentialist aesthetics. Okay. According to the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy, the latter consists of contributions to aesthetic thinking made or inspired by existentialist philosophers such as Camus, Simone de Beauvoir, Gabriel Marcel, Maurice Merleau-Ponty, and Jean-Paul Sartre. But as is clear from my definition of existential aesthetics, as well as other stuff listed below, one can engage in existential aesthetics without subscribing to the basic tenets of existentialism. Yeah, I mean, this doesn't have to go with what they thought was cool. It has to go with what those ideas were kind of engaged with. Yeah, you don't have to subscribe to them. You have to do something but it's going to be somewhat in the neighborhood, though. Conversely, not everything that fits under the banner of existentialist aesthetics will thereby also qualify as existential aesthetics. Existentialist philosophers have made contributions to, for instance, the ontology of art, the philosophy of fiction, and the study of the imagination that have no direct bearing on the existential importance of art and aesthetics. This is not to deny that some contributions will qualify as contributions to both existentialist and existential aesthetics. And just like everyday aesthetics is a relatively new branch of aesthetics, even though it finds inspiration and precursors in the long Buddhist tradition of writing about the aesthetics of the everyday, so too will the budding field of existential aesthetics undoubtedly find inspiration and precursors in the existentialist tradition of philosophy. In fact, as I suggest in the concluding section, existential aesthetics is one of the key areas where Continental and Analytic aesthetics may fruitfully meet. But for reasons mentioned above, it is important to distinguish the two and to emphasize that one can engage in existential aesthetics without subscribing to existentialism or any other isms. I mean, okay, but I mean, you're going to need to start somewhere, and I guess that's what the author is saying, but like, this is the ready-made starting point, where what we're talking about in existentialism, of course, not everything, is going to have some bearing on existential aesthetics. All right. There are different... how long am I going? Okay, saying too bad. There are different ways of carving up this emerging field. One way is to distinguish contributions to existential aesthetics based on their object of study. Some essays will focus on individual works of art, such as Hannah Gadsby's Nanette and Sheila Lynn Tott, or The Big Lebowski and Ebert and Julian Baggini. Other contributions may focus on a particular genre, art form, or time period. For instance, Maes analyzes the profoundly moving effect of 16th century Renaissance portraits and describes how some of these portraits confront us with death and oblivion in a very powerful way, a theme that is also picked up by Jean-Luc Nancy in the chapter Recall of his book Portrait. Nick Riggle, who we've mentioned before, I like Nick, starts from the observation that art can radically change our lives and selves, and that many avant-garde artists in the 20th century created participatory situations with the explicit aim to directly engage people in the course of their lives and move them to express themselves in transformative ways. Hey Josh, what's up? But how can we authentically express ourselves in a way that transforms the self we express? Riggle develops the concept of transformative expression to address this paradox and enhance our understanding of the social and aesthetic character of our capacity to distance ourselves from our commitments and act in the expressive ways that participatory art invites. In Agency and Identity in Music, or You Are What You Audit, Gerald Levinson describes how different musical activities enable agency of different sorts, which in turn help form musical identities, which then enter into the overall identities of persons. To highlight music's existential significance, Levinson writes, "The music I have responded to most deeply as a listener over the years is perhaps the most dominant element in the fabric of my life, apart from relationships with other human beings. That music has permeated my existence and shaped my outlook, I would say, to an even greater degree than all the science, philosophy, literature, film, and visual art I have also absorbed in all of that time." This subject is also investigated in Landon S. L. Peck and Patrick Greeley's Autobiographical Significance of Meaningful Music Experiences, and Georg Fingerhut and colleagues' The Aesthetic Self. So it's interesting. We've got a whole bunch of people saying, look, I really, 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 really like this music. It has made a very big difference to me. And so you can talk about that in a philosophical way. And doing the music also changes your life because you are participating in it, you're listening to it, you're playing it. So that changes you over time, those practices. Okay. Sometimes work in existential aesthetics presents findings that are meant to apply across the arts. In Aesthetic Intimacy, Maria Jose Alcaraz Leon studies the sense of intimacy in the feeling of a profound connection that some artworks or artists can engender. This happens rarely, she notes, but when it occurs, works or artists can come to acquire a very important place in the appreciator's life. She examines existing accounts of such intimacy before elaborating on her own conception. John Halliday focuses on the same phenomena, but then specifically in relation to fictional literature, while the ideas of aesthetic attachment and obligations are explored further in the work of Nick Riggle, Robbie Kubala, and Julianne Chung. What it means to truly love a work of art, as opposed to merely judging it aesthetically pleasing or successful, and how such a love may have a lasting impact on one's life, is the subject of a number of recent publications. What I'm also thinking is, when this goes wrong, when people get obsessive about art or a person on the internet, which is basically a performance. This is, philosophy roulette and streaming is a performance, and so is all the other people out there. And so you've got the people that lose their mind, say over Amaranth, and they're losing their mind over something that lady can do, which is stream in a certain way to keep people's attention. And so this is changing people's lives. Now, have people obsessed over other people throughout the course of history? Yes. But this is a different thing, because these are not people that you're actually meeting. You're seeing, a video representation of them, of what they want you to see. So it's there's this is definitely something that will freak out people define themselves in terms of their actors and performers that they like, and that can get a little weird at times when you overdo it, but this is part this is be pretty hard to deny that people actually do this. So it's you can talk about all these abstract ones, but the fact that people obsess over actors and actresses and streamers, I mean, please don't obsess over me, but seriously, this does happen. and like the people define themselves in terms of these people that they don't know. Like, I'm like a super fan. It's like, yeah, are you? Is that really how you want to define yourself? Well, who cares? I mean, that they do is something. Okay. Existential aesthetics has things to say not just about the appreciation of art, but also about the making of art. Jussi Antti Saarinen's book, Effect in Artistic Creativity, Painting to Feel, draws attention to a critically important but often overlooked reason for why painters paint. It makes them feel alive and creative and liberated from the constraints of life. Painters may also paint in order to deal with loss, to grieve. It makes them feel sheltered, at home, safe, and sound. He adds, painters pursue the mentioned kinds of affects via painting because they galvanize, enrich, and restructure their overall sense of being. This means that painting and painterly effectivity carry considerable existential import. Saarinen here builds on his earlier work on oceanic feeling and painterly creativity. Painting, he argues, may induce oceanic feelings which involve a sensation of self-boundary dissolution, which can best be understood as shifts in existential feeling, a term he borrows from Matthew Radcliffe. Existential feelings are pre-intentional background feelings that structure experience as a whole. They are ways of finding ourselves in the world. A sudden shift in existential feeling, something that the activity of painting can bring about, tends to have a momentous impact on one's overall take on reality. Saarinen illustrates this with various anecdotes of painters who reported such life-changing experiences. It should be emphasized that the purview of existential aesthetics is not restricted to the domain of art. In Aesthetics, Ethics, and the Meaning of Place, Arto Haapala is interested in cases where we are able to create a particularly deep relation to an aesthetic object. Inspired by Heidegger and Gadamer, he argues that this type of bond is often based in the particular characteristics of our place. Place is understood here not in the straightforward physical sense, rather in the existential sense of where that I want to define it. Place is, for me, significant and meaningful collection of entities. Yeah, I mean, home and place, where you live, like, these things get wrapped up and have feeling associated with them. So it's like, they're saying place here, but I mean, you might think more of like home or like, dwelling and stuff, which is, directly out of Heidegger. Where do you dwell? Haapala goes on to argue that while originality and innovation are driving motivation of all avant-garde art, familiarity is at the heart of aesthetics of place. My place is dear to me because it is part of my existence. When we are in constant contact with our surroundings and have created our very own personal ties to it, it becomes something to which we cannot have an indifferent attitude. Our place is too close to us for us to have any distance. Yeah, I mean, you can think of home as more like what you mean by our place. Like, what is your home place? Like, you can't go home anymore, or like you want to return home. These sorts of thoughts that have meaning to people. I just saw an ad for on YouTube for, I think it was, or maybe it was on Twitch, but it was looks like a new vampire movie, and like someone gets like absconded away and like they're having fun, and they all of a sudden realize they're hanging out with vampires, and they're like, I want to go home, and the vampires are like, you are home. So like, it's like, what is your place in this world? What is your place? What is your home? Don't you know your home? Get in the hole is your home. Get in the hole. Don't go home. Go to your home. It's like, okay. And how memorials mean, or how to do things with stones, James O. Young asks why it is that war memorials can profoundly move people unacquainted with the dead and with no commitment to their cause. Part of the answer, he suggests, lies in their ability to convey that war involves the tragic loss of human life. People can be told this, but actual exemplification in stone of the magnitude of this loss seems to make the human toll of war inescapable and deeply affecting. Yeah, I was at the Vietnam War Memorial. It's a nice piece of art, really is. And you kind of, it's smart. You get in there and you feel differently when you're in there. How can the experience of beauty have a life or self-transforming import, and why is it often explicitly denied any such importance in contemporary philosophy? This is the question addressed in Nick Riggle's On the Interest in Beauty and Disinterest. As part of this endeavor, Riggle discusses several literary depictions of encounters with beauty that are deeply meaningful, including passages from Proust, Rilke, and John Williams Stoner. As Riggle points out, in contrast to the tradition of emphasizing disinterested pleasure, the self seems to be rather involved in these experiences, not diminished, obscured, or excluded. Indeed, the self seems essentially to be clarified, illuminated, transformed. More recently, Dominic McIver Lopez, Being for Beauty, raises the question of how engaging with beauty contributes to a life that goes well. Alright, I think I've read this on stream, or I've read something by Dominic McIver Lopez, and I think we also may have read On the Interest in Beauty and Disinterest, or at least I read something else. No, I've read this, I know I have. Was it on stream? I don't know. But like, I've seen these things, and you can go find me reading Dominic McIver Lopez on Philosophy Roulette, and I suspect it was, early on in Philosophy Roulette because of, COVID-19 and all. So this is like just in that, this was probably been published in, whenever that was. So in the time period. Okay, how much farther do I got to get to? I think I got to, yeah. Oh, he's the APA chairman or something like that? Yes, that's right. I just got to get to the bottom of page 8. So not even, we're a little bit past half at the moment. Yeah, I'm trying to remember. Yeah, I don't know what he is exactly right now, but he wasn't back then. He seemed like a nice guy. He sent me an email. He was like impressed. He actually was interested in Philosophy Roulette. He was saying, like, I think one of the things that because I used to email all the authors. I don't do that anymore because it just got to be a hassle. But he was saying that he thought it was interesting what I was doing, and then he was saying it's one thing for like me doing it, like where I'm reading a random paper that I don't know. He was thinking, what if like he was to go back and like live stream a paper he knows really well, giving all his thoughts on it like now. So like live commentating something he really well knows, which I thought was an interesting take on it too, because someone who's like read a paper 100 times has a very different understanding of it, and to go through it and like just spout off all the different thoughts that they've come up with over the years would be interesting. I think that was Dom Lopez at least, but yeah, it was a while ago now. That was probably reasonably early in Roulette. Oh, you talked to him when you got into the programming committee. Cool. I mean, I hope he was cool when you dealt with him. But yeah, it's he seemed okay when I was dealing with him. I mean, however briefly. I can't even say I know him. I sent an email or two to him. Okay, let's get through this. All right. As is clear from the brief and by no means exhaustive overview in Section 3, contributions to existential aesthetics can have various objects of study. The focus can be on a particular aesthetic experience, on aesthetic practice, a non-artistic aesthetic object, or it can be on works of art, artistic genres, or specific art forms. But contributions to existential aesthetics can also be distinguished based on whether they study 1. Existentially impactful, or 2. Existentially illuminating character of a certain work of art, aesthetic experiences, or aesthetic pursuits. As was suggested in Section 1, there are different ways in which these can acquire existential importance. 1. They can deeply affect the course or quality of a person's life, or 2. They can help a person address certain existential questions. Regarding the latter, one could make further subgroupings based on the specific existential questions that are being addressed. For example, how to face our own mortality, or how to deal with the loss of meaning and the feeling of absurdity. Oh wait, I'm trying to remember. There's a guy who does light art, and I really liked it. And he had these these colors that were just like squares on the wall, and but you lost all sense of depth perception on them. And I remember looking at them, and I was all fascinated. So it's maybe for me at least, I could talk about like my phenomenological analysis may have started sometime around then, because I lost the sense of loss of depth perception in that guy's art. that, like, I remember that. And this guy, he's got some crazy giant thing out in like the Southwest somewhere that I hope to go see one day. Trying to remember that. I could look that guy up though. Alright, before I explain why 2 is particularly deserving of further development, let me add some more examples to lend further substance to this subcategory. In Love, Death, and Life's Summum Bonum, Ana Cristina Ribeiro argues that the Before trilogy, directed by Richard Linklater, is best seen as an example of memento mori art. Memento mori, the admonition to remember death, can take many forms, but the core idea is that an awareness of our inevitable end should bear on how we live. Ribeiro shows how Linklater's warning works in each of the movies and argues that with the Before trilogy, he makes the case for romantic love as life's summum bonum. Should I have something here that reminds us of our death? I don't know, like put like a painting up or something. Levinson 2012 presents life lessons from jazz standards and explains how songs like Day In, Day Out or You Don't Know What Love Is can help to address the sort of existential crisis that love can bring about and that Ethan Hawke evokes in the quote above. In Irony, Disruption, and Moral Imperfection, Dieter de Klerk discusses how engaging with ironic storytelling can yield existentially significant insight. Concretely, de Klerk outlines how we can harness ironic media as a resource to cultivate a sense of self-irony that helps us deal with moral imperfection. This is the old humor is a good way to deal with problems. Or is a way. I don't know if it's a good way, but that's the thing. You have a fake skull in your office. Yeah, see, there you go. The interesting part about this is that people do this. Like, it is a thing. Like Valpo just said, they have a skull in their office. And, like, for whatever reason, does it help existentially? I don't know. But people, like, it does. Memento mori, motherfuckers. But, like, yeah, like, does it help? Maybe. And I know, my brother was not sleeping well or something, and he moved stuff around. It wasn't really, he may have had like an old like piece of bone or something, what's it, when it gets turns into rock. But I think it may not have been a memento mori for him. It may have just been something like he had for a long time, but he put it in like his new bedroom and it helped him sleep, he felt. So it's like these sorts of like things like that can help you somehow, like the idea of death or just like whatever it was. But that may have also been something from his past. Not sure. But yeah, these things matter. Okay, the problem is that if we set moral perfection as a standard for all of our actions, we will become neurotic and feeling constantly ashamed and guilty about failing to meet an unattainable standard. Stories can give us insight into what living such a life might mean and provide us with aesthetic resources to avoid it. One of his key examples is the ironic representation of the moral perfectionist Chidi Anagonye in the comedy series The Good Place. Epiphanies can be understood, to use a phrase of L.A. Paul's, as transformative experiences. Sophie Grace Chappelle examines such a moment of revelation, drawing on numerous examples taken from literature. According to Chappelle, an epiphany can best be understood as an overwhelming, existentially significant manifestation of value, often sudden and surprising, which feels like it comes from outside, and which teaches us something new and in a way that demands a response. A different take on epiphany and aesthetic experience as a motor of self-transformation is presented by Matthew Pulowski and Fuminori Akiba, starting from examples taken from Proust, Kandinsky, and Namjoon Pak. They introduce a 5-stage model of art perception to account for art's potential to generate perceptual and conceptual change and for the connection of art viewing to viewer personality. What is particularly interesting about works of art is that they are existentially illuminating. What is particularly interesting about works of art that are existentially illuminating is that intrinsic link there appears to be between existential value and artistic value. This is not so for works that are merely existentially impactful. The main character in, again, Dutch speak, Hank, is deeply attached to the song Una Paloma Blanca because it reminds him of his beloved dog, Shirk, who had a curious affection for this one song. But the fact that the song has this existential importance for Hank does not yet make it a masterpiece of songwriting. Hank himself calls the song garbage, despite the meaning it has acquired for him over the years. Well, I mean, you could be like Australian call everyone cunt, and that's usually meant to be a good thing if you're Australian. Like all your friends, those are your friends. So this could be, a nice use of the insult. So in this case, existential value is not in any way linked to artistic value. However, with works that are genuinely existentially illuminating, there does not seem to be this connection. For instance, Nanette is a brilliant and masterful work of comedy, Lintott argues, in part because Hannah Gadsby succeeds in telling the complex story of the existential trauma she endured as a lesbian who presents as genderqueer in a way that is funny, but also deeply illuminating and confronting. Here, the existential value is part of the work's artistic value. Stecker has proposed the following test to determine whether something counts as an artistic value. Does one need to understand the artwork to appreciate its being valuable in that way? If so, it is an artistic value. If not, it is not. So do you need to understand the artwork to appreciate it being valuable in that way? Okay, if that's how they want to define it, but that's fine. Okay, in that case, it may be a non-artistic value, but that the artwork happens to possess, comparable to say its financial value. So yeah, so you don't have to understand it as an artwork. Okay, it seems clear if we accept this criterion that a work's being existentially illuminating will count as an artistic value. Because you have to understand the existential content. It does not suffice to know, for instance, that a work deals with existential themes to know that it is genuinely existentially illuminating. One has to learn how the work explores these themes, what attitudes it manifests toward its subject matter, what it requires its audience to imagine and to feel before one can assess this value. And so, it can be considered an artistic value where simply having an existential impact on someone's life does not necessarily qualify as such. Yeah, I mean, you could be all emotional while you are watching, a crappy piece of art, and then you associate it. It's like, what was it called? If you remember your Clueless, the movie, people have like, what's her name? She died tragically. But she was like, oh, that was the song we danced to the first time. It's like she loved some crappy song because she danced with her boyfriend, and that was existentially important to her. But of course, the song didn't matter. It was that was the song that was playing when she was dancing with her ex-boyfriend, or wasn't even her ex at that point, I think. Just some guy that rejected her. Okay. No doubt there is more to be said and explored about the distinction between 1 and 2, not least because Stecker's criterion has been contested and other questions impose themselves. For example, can the two categories be further refined? Is being existentially illuminating a form of cognitive value? This is certainly one of the topics, along with the other issues that I discuss in the next section, that merit further investigation. As a nascent area of research, it is difficult to predict how it will develop and evolve. Nevertheless, I think we can identify some important avenues for future research. First, there are many questions that go to the very heart of what existential aesthetics is, which remain to be explored. How the existential importance of an artwork relates to its artistic value is just one of these questions. Let me list some others. Are there significant differences between art forms when it comes to the potential to gain existential importance? How exactly do we determine what it means for someone's life to change in a fundamental and non-trivial way? And what are the ways in which an aesthetic experience can engender such an effort? One sec. Okay, sorry about that. To what extent is this a matter of the appreciator's own agental activity? Yeah, how much is the person adding to this? Should we distinguish between negative and positive aesthetic experience in this regard? If one can come to truly love a work of art, can one also profoundly hate a work of art in such a manner that it has a deep impact on one's life? How does the existential importance of art and aesthetics compare to other endeavors and experiences that acquire such importance? In addressing existential questions, how does art differ from philosophy? How can existential philosophical work on the meaning of life be brought to bear on the study of art and aesthetics? Are there existential truths or insights that can only be expressed by art? If an aesthetic pursuit can acquire existential import, it can also lose that import, but what is involved in such a loss and how does it come about? Can art help us cope with the global existential threats like COVID-19 or climate change, and if so, how? And the list goes on. Secondly, there is a great untapped potential in exploring the boundaries and areas of overlap between existential aesthetics and other areas of philosophy and aesthetics. I want to highlight 3 in particular, though these are by no means the only possible areas. So we've got black aesthetics. All human beings face existential questions in virtue of being human, but there is no denying that racial conditions inflect the general existential considerations of despair, joy, meaningfulness, and absurdity. As Paul Taylor notes, such considerations often take shape in light of questions like this. How is it possible to live under conditions of racial terror, exclusion, and oppression? If the prospect of life's meaninglessness is terrifying, how much more terrifying is it to be enslaved and stripped as much as possible of even of feeble existential armaments, religion, language, ties to one's ancestors and descendants, with which humans try to ward off despair? If, as Sartre says, hell is other people, what is it to face the threat of lynching, of other people treating the breaking and burning of your body as an occasion for celebration? These existential challenges, Taylor writes, have not only been the subject of black aesthetic production, think of the entire blues canon, but it has also been the subject of aesthetic criticism and theory, from studies of black music by Angela Davis and Leroy Jones to Saidiya Hartman's remarkable study of slaves being forced to dance for their masters to demonstrate their contentment with their condition. Feminist aesthetics and body aesthetics. Gender, like race, will have an impact on how existential quandaries are experienced and dealt with. For instance, while some have thought of midlife crises as only affecting men, others have drawn attention to how they may affect men and women differently, and what we can learn from art and literature in this respect. The aesthetics of sexiness, a crucial but gendered element of selfhood, is examined in Sheila Lintott and Sherry Irvin, whereas scholars like Eliza Steinbach have theorized the role of photography and cinema in practices of survival within trans communities. Notwithstanding such thoughtful contributions, so much research remains to be done in this area. Health humanities. This burgeoning field of study draws on the arts and humanities to study health and well-being. Established practices like bibliotherapy, that is, the use of literature to help people cope with impactful changes in their lives or promote personal growth. Yeah, body aesthetics, exactly. This is I agree, all this stuff here is it's going to be interesting. How do you actually gain meaning in life via these different areas, and is there overlap between all these different things? So I think this is right, but again, we're actually focusing on lived experiences here, like black life, body life. So it's very much in the everyday, a certain subject, certain areas of everyday experience, but then overlap with wider talk. So here, and then health, again, another embodied thing here. So we've got some embodied aesthetics. So yes, Valpo, I think that's correct. This is very embodied, and this goes up to the Maurice Merleau-Ponty for existential phenomenological literature too. So that's probably where we're going to get to, just below this. Okay, health humanities. This burgeoning field of study draws on the arts and humanities to study health and well-being. Established practices like bibliotherapy, that is, the use of literature to help people cope with impactful changes in their lives or promote personality growth, and expressive writing, that is, writing to help make sense of one's thoughts and emotions in periods of crisis and illness. I mean, I've written things down. Helps me when I'm angry about something. Already point to the potential for philosophy of art to contribute. Recently, there have been some overtures in this direction, a case in point being de Klerk's Satire, Comedy, and Mental Health, in which he draws on analytic aesthetics to examine how satire may help us to negotiate a healthy balance between care for others and care for self. But there is undoubtedly more potential to unlock here. Okay. Existential aesthetics. And this is back to the suggestion from above. Existential aesthetics, I have proposed, is the branch of aesthetics that investigates various ways in which art and certain kinds of aesthetic practices or aesthetic experiences can be of existential importance to people. While there is existing work in this area, there is also great potential for that expansion, and for a number of reasons, philosophers may be encouraged to fulfill that potential. First, for many philosophers, existential concerns are what first drew them to the profession. Many aestheticians and philosophers of art, in particular, will have chosen their field of study because art or certain aesthetic pursuits are of deep significance to them. Undertaking work in this existential aesthetics may be a way to reconnect with that original spark of interest. It has been for the author. Yeah, this is the sort of swipe that at philosophers, that they don't give a shit after a while. Like, they're saying, why are you actually in this? I don't know. But this philosopher says, getting back into something they like, get their spark of interest back. Moreover, in studying why and how art can be existentially illuminating, there is a real opportunity to make one's own philosophical work existentially illuminating. You want your work to mean something to you. I don't always have this. I don't normally do anything unless I have some sort of ulterior motive also, because philosophy is just too hard to get, to put the time and effort in. So, but yes, you want something more out of your work than just, publishing a paper, because publishing a paper is professionally good, but if it doesn't mean anything, you put a lot of time and effort in just for, it's just for the paper, not for the, and I meant paper and just the, the paper it shows up on, kind of just for the money it shows, but it's a lot of work and you're not getting a lot of money out of it. So, secondly, existential aesthetics addresses themes and topics that are never just of academic interest, and it should thus be able to appeal to people outside of academia who have a genuine interest in the genuine investment in the arts. This is less obviously the case for, say, technical discussions on the nature of depiction, value eliminativism, or the ontology of art works. When one introduces such debates to participants in the art world or to non-philosophy students, it is often necessary to explain in what way these debates bear on other interests the audience may have. Most work in existential aesthetics will require much less of an effort in this regard. If the making or appreciation of art occupies an important place in one's life, or if one is contemplating certain existential questions and is anxious to make sense of it all, it should not be difficult at all to relate to the issues at play in existential aesthetics. A further advantage, as is evidenced from the list in the examples in sections 3 and 4, is that existential aesthetics may help to bridge the divide between analytic and continental aesthetics. There was a time, as David Benatar points out, that analytic philosophers did not pay much attention to existential questions. Philosophers of art proved no exception. For instance, the standard and comprehensive anthology Aesthetics and Philosophy of Art, the Analytic tradition, contains not a single paper that would fall under the banner of existential aesthetics. This situation stands quite in stark contrast to influential French and German philosophers who had lived up to and to some extent inspired the public reputation that philosophers have for grappling with these sorts of questions. This divide between analytic and continental philosophy, while never absolute, is now gradually dissolving. Analytic philosophers in general, and philosophers of art and aestheticians in particular, are engaging more and more with existential matters. When they do so, they may both inspire and be inspired by work in continental philosophy. Thus, existential aesthetics could be very well one of those fields where the rapprochement between the two is made possible and even encouraged. Yeah, so I was hoping there'd be more on this, but we got one last paragraph. When I expressed the hope that there will be more existential aesthetics in the future, I am, of course, not claiming that this is the only or the best way of doing aesthetics. You missed the paper, Vipers, oh no! Rather, believing it is a promising and exciting branch of aesthetics that perhaps has been unduly neglected. By highlighting this work here and discussing it under the heading of existential aesthetics, my aim has been to improve our understanding of what is already being done in this area, draw attention to its significance, and facilitate further and more focused philosophical activity in this direction. Yeah, I know, you'll have to get over it, Vipers. This was not terrible, but I mean, then again, it was not crazy, trying to do a crazy amount. What this was doing was, it was saying, look, we should focus on art and how art is meaningful to us in our existential sort of lives. What is matter? Why does some art really matter to us? And that's a great question. Why does some art really seem to matter in our lives? Whereas you might like certain works of art, but they don't actually change the course of your life. Whereas some works of art do change the course of your life. So, yeah, Vipers, I hope you're well. But yeah, you missed both papers at this point. Sorry. And I don't think I have the voice to do a third. But yeah, what was interesting about this paper is that, look, is there something to art that can be very, very, very important to people? Yes. Now, what exactly is that is a good question, and is that worth a whole new section of aesthetics to talk about arts that have like existential meaning to us, or how art can have existential meaning to us? I don't know, but it isn't a bad way to go about it in some sense. Look, everyone has like music they love, movies they love, books they love. Why do these books, movies, whatever's, paintings matter so much? And they also said, the doing of it matters too. So like, cooking or, painting or whatever it is you're doing, that changes how you go about your life. These practices, they seep out into the rest of your being. And so it's like these things matter. And why do you incorporate like these sorts of activities in your lives? These are like good questions. And like, so what is it about art and like practice and habits along the aesthetic lines that matter so much to us? So, and then there was ritual too, which also should go back. Like a grieving ritual how is that different from meditating or like praying or mindfulness? All these things, like, is there a proper aesthetic to grieving, as was mentioned above? Like, is that something that can give us a feeling of solace? A proper grieving ritual, can that be improved upon? What is that? What is the aesthetics upon that, like a grieving ritual? What is that giving us in terms of like aesthetic value, and how can that be improved upon so that grieving can be done? I bet they wrote this with "Last night I DJ Saved My Life" on repeat. We were talking about stuff like that too. Like, there was definitely going to be artworks like that are going to be like life-saving, and it's going to mean different things for different people. And so whoever, I forget who, what artist that, I like that song. Last night I DJ Saved My Life. Yeah, so, it's like, yeah, but like that's the whole point. It's like, how did the DJ save your life? They were saying about what they did, like, I forget where it was, where they said they really loved some work of art, and like that's what they felt. But yeah, but like I think that's gonna come into how does this work? Well, one interesting thing on like health humanities things, they found out like that people's outcomes at the doctors really made a difference by being in the doctor's setting. The idea of like going to a doctor's office helped out with that. So what's the aesthetics of being into like an institutional like doctor's office that made an effect on you that in some sense changed the health outcome for you? And so the idea that like you can do things like that, where is that like sort of institutionalized doctoring that is just that you get from the aesthetics of like a doctor's office that matters to you? So like these are things that could be investigated. How does the health, the aesthetics of a doctor's office affect your health? Like that's a question. And it matters because it does. Now, is there a placebo effect to just being in a doctor's office? Maybe. And the aesthetics of sexiness. Sexiness matters to people. Like, these things matter to people in their everyday life. How do you be sexy? How do you feel sexy? Do you want to feel sexy to other people? Like, or to at least some people? Do you not want to be treated sexy by certain people? And so it's like, how's that going to matter? Well, that in some sense is the question, Vipers. Is it aesthetic itself, or is it a subcategory of the placebo? And even if it is a subcategory of the placebo, how did that act? Why is being in a certain environment create a placebo effect? And is that is the environmental, like the stupid art you see on a doctor's wall, is that actually helping your medical outcome? And what is that? Then there definitely is something to the aesthetics there. So the author here actually addressed this earlier, saying basically no, there's going to be a lot of overlap with all of this, but that we can investigate these things also. That's okay. Like, that's not a problem. It's not going to be aesthetics by itself. It's going to be aesthetics in the everyday quite often, and they made a specific point to say that. It doesn't necessarily be in your... It doesn't necessarily have to be in your everyday interactions, but it's a lot of this is going to overlap with your everyday aesthetics. Like, what is it to go into a doctor's office? That goes into the everyday aesthetics. Like, what is it to be in certain sorts of environments, and what is the feeling of those environments? So, but like, that's a very good question. It's just they address that because they want to say, yes, it is other things, but it's also going to be analyzable along aesthetic lines, especially with how it affects you as you feel in like your being. Exactly. Feels good, feels bad, feels, uncomfortable in certain ways. That's right, Josh. I agree. So, yeah. But I mean, in some sense, the point of this paper was they just, they were giving a lot of examples from a lot of people to show that the area could be described in some sense in a coherent way, like in one sort of like you can get an idea what this is. And like I said before earlier, it's also going to live and die with what you understand to be existential. Like, what is that word mean for people? Because if you don't actually think that means a lot, it's going to be a lot harder to keep this idea together. But like, even so, like, this person wants to like keep themselves away from saying only what the existentialist thought was important was existential aesthetics. No, it doesn't mean what the existentialists themselves thought. It means the topics that a lot of the existentialists were discussing. And it's like, well, that is what's going to be important. But what was I saying? I forget already. But like, yeah, you need to get like you're going to get like ennui, but you're going to be discussing things about like how things feel like one way or the other and how that matters to you. Yeah, but this was just a lot of trying to show that this is important to people, and like I said, yeah, live and die with what people think of as existentialism. Because I mean, they're not going to, even though this is what I was saying, even though the author wanted to distance themselves from the existentialists, they're still using the word, and the word is going to live in like people in people's mind. It still is going to have to pull people in that direction, and so the whole idea is going to live and die with how people feel about existentialists and what those ideas are in terms of aesthetics. Yeah. Okay. Any further questions? I don't know. Viper says, as you scroll through it, you notice the question, what makes life worth living? I've seen philosophy questioning the individual's place or society's place, but never life as a whole, from amoebas to humans. Has anyone addressed that? So what makes life worth living? Like, you mean, and you're saying globally. I mean, I can give you the answer from evolutionary biology standpoint. It doesn't give you... Well, worth living implies agency. Yeah, I was going to say, from the biological standpoint, life and evolution just is a self-continuing process. Evolution just keeps doing it. So it's worth that, yeah. But like as a whole, worth living, I think what semiotics has a point there. Worth is worth it to some person or some agent. And so people want to know, like, yeah, what makes life worth living as a whole. And then you always get the, what's the meaning of life, man? As if there's some global meaning. But like, yeah, then you get yourself into whatever value theory that like you personally like and what is valued in your life. But then getting more specific, I of course can't answer that. So the idea is like, can you answer that for everybody? What's the meaning of life? No, I can't answer what the meaning of life is for everyone. Like, what's the value of life? Again, I can give you the like very specific things on different areas, but on the whole, I don't know if there's any global answer to that question. But yeah, but to ask your question, has anyone addressed it? Yes, they have. Are any of those answers any good? No. You would have heard them if we had any good answers, Vipers. Like, we'd be like, hey, we got the meaning of life. Here it is. Here you go. It's like, no, it's not. Not that easy. Yeah. But that's the thing. Once you sit in a semi-arc, like, you're right. It's just, but once you get any of these things, people want to ask like the big questions. It's like, it's too big, too much. I can't answer the meaning of life for everybody at all times. It's like, I'm not that smart. I mean, I don't even know if like we're ever gonna get a consensus about the exact meanings of these things. They've been discussed for thousands of years, and arguably we've just gone in circles. I mean, we've gotten more specific about what we're saying a lot of times. Thank you with the fish references. It's that the question, like, what's the meaning of life, or asked at the individual level, but not at life as a whole, is looking for individual meaning, even a valid question. Yeah, people, to answer your other question, yes, people have asked that sort of thing too. But then it sounds like you're looking at like things at just different levels now. Meaning of life at the individual level versus individual, looking at the meaning of life at like group level, you're gonna have the same exact problems. You're not gonna get an answer at one level and not the other level. Yeah, it's like what's in the semiotic is saying, all right, if you're looking at it like life as a whole, well then life as a whole compared to what? To whom? Are there other things out there that you can compare life as a whole to? And that's like getting into very weird questions, like compared to the gods, compared to like other forms of life, as opposed to non-life, and then what's the value of life versus non-life? And I mean their interactions, like humans versus rocks. But I mean, or like all like sentient beings versus rocks. What's the meaning of life? Well, I mean it's like, or versus physics or something. Yeah, it's like, are we talking about like all rational agents versus like physics? But I mean, that's a weird question. I don't know if there's any answer that we can like rationally give that like compares like agency versus non-agency that would give you a value to one or the other. You're just sort of describing the situation. No, I don't think it's a bad question. It's just, it's way beyond me, semiotics, and you'd have to sort of narrow down exactly what you're talking about. But anytime you narrow it down, you're gonna have troubles, because once you narrow it down, then you're gonna get back to the individual meaning question. But once you get too big, then you're gonna lose any thread to any grasp of like, well, life versus non-life. What do you mean by non-life at that point? It's like, well, life involves, all the like the physics of the world. Life involves dealing with other living things like rationality and questioning, but then also deals with like, physics and biology and like water or whatever. So it's yeah, I don't know. Yeah. So there's no like abstract. See, that's part of the thing. Yeah, like there's no abstract theory of worth that isn't worth it to some person or something. So that's part of the difficulty too. How do you have abstract theories of value? And then yeah. So I don't know. But I'm losing my mind at this point, so I don't know if I can do a whole lot better. If you got more questions, let me know, let me hear. Well, he did that, and I sort of addressed it, but I said I still can't. I mean, if you want to think about that, fine, semiotics. But like again, I don't think we're gonna get any farther on distinguishing life forms and matter. Like, what's the value of all life versus life forms and matter? Like non-matter or non-living matter. It's like, well, again, you need to have some sort of independent way of like some God's eye view looking at the two things and like, well, this one has value that's different from that one. But we don't get that sort of view where you can have like some sort of independent value system. We just don't get that. There's nowhere to stand in our world that will take us outside of life and matter that we can get some sort of objective view. So yeah, it's like what? Where's your objectivity here? You're not going to get objectivity here. Now, has people asked these questions? Do they come up with stuff? Yes. Do I think they're going to get very far? No, not really. Viper says, I'm thinking. It is hard to articulate at 4:30 a.m. Yes, you are in Europe. You should be sleeping, probably. But we imbue some expression of the DNA molecule with moral dimensions, but not other animals. For example, animals just do what they do, but with humans, there's a code of conduct we're expected to adhere to. So what does that proximity or familiarity say about our moral expectations? I think that's exactly what it says. It says we think we're special, basically. But you might, there's ways that we don't we think that animals might have different kinds of morality than us. They might still feel bad about certain things. There's instances where we have seen lions feel apparently feeling bad for baby animals or something. So maybe they do have some sort of baby animals of other species, like they killed the parent and they felt bad about the baby or something. So, or appeared to have. So just because we have morals, we attribute that to us, but I don't know if that's just us being arrogant things. Yeah, I mean, but that's what our us and dogs, for example, we have a lot of love for dogs or cats or whatever, and so we attribute that stuff because we see them participating in our life or the way or thing or similar forms of life to us, and so their life is in some sense is kind of like ours, and so we might give them some sort of similar moral status as us. Yeah, I don't want to be specific. People love their snakes or their frogs or whatever. I mean, there was a little cutesy story about someone loving their praying mantics the other day. Yeah, people love their pigs. That's one of those don't clip that things. But yeah, so it's why do we do this? Well, because we have it, and this is how we think about each other and things in our lives, and we give that stuff value. But again, that comes back to us. We give it value in our lives because this is what matters to us. And so what does that say about proximity or familiarity, about moral expectations? I think that just means we only understand ourselves, or we understand ourselves more than we understand other things, and then that's all we have to attribute to other things. So we can only attribute what we know to other things because we have limited understanding of other things. Sinesemiak says, when I lived in Portland, there were people who had pet pigs, walking them like dogs. Oh, and a miniature horse for no reason too. Wow, you lived in Portlandia. That's amazing. Yeah, but that's cool. You can have a horse or a pig or whatever, and apparently pigs are pretty intelligent and whatnot. So it's sure. If you want to have a pet pig and it's nice and it's cool, it's good. Now, why do we like these things? But yeah, you're saying philosophy is anthropocentric. Yes, it is. But how do we get objective? We need to step outside those biases, and it's hard. Oh, I'm not telling you anything about that Sinesemiatics. I do not know those people. Yeah, getting outside of our biases is yeah. It's not going to happen very easily. You do the best you can, and basically you try to see what the other people or other things. People in Portland, Sinesemiatics, Portlandia people. That's right, those people on the other side of the country from me. Yeah, the question of objectivity and any of our stuff is questionable. Basically, you try to do, as far as I'm concerned, you try to do the best you can and taking yourself out of the equation, but you're never going to. But you can you can see when we are overdoing it too sometimes. And so when we do overdo it, you're attributing way too much agency to a tree. Oh, the tree was specifically helping me do something. It's I doubt the tree was specifically helping you do something. Maybe your dog was specifically helping you do something. Maybe the dog understood, but did the tree understand? Probably not. So it's you have to, there's limits, and so you can try to understand what the bounds of different things are, and if you can try to understand how those things are interacting in the world in some sense, separate from you, because trees live a long time, they're acting in different ways, so we can figure this out. It's not so easy to break it down into ways that that makes sense to us, like what the tree is up to versus what we're up to, and like we can in some sense get a bit objective about things, but are we going to get completely out of our own skin? You can't jump out of your own body. You just can't. Like, you can't jump out of your own skin. You can't leave your bones behind. Your skeleton, like, you can't, like, leave your skeleton. There is no objective, like, third place to get out. Like, you, me, but there's no, like, individual, like, third spot we can get in between to see, like, the objectivity of, like, our discussion right here. It's like, no. We don't get that. Why is it ethical to let your dog pee on a tree, but I can't pee on my dog? An investigation by Viper's Gratitude. Yeah, but I mean, trees, do they care about peeing on trees? Like, you could pee on a tree too. Mostly people don't mind peeing on trees, but like peeing on like sentient things generally is frowned upon because, you know, like then you're making a mess of that thing. Trees, on the other hand, you know, that is kind of part of like nature for them, I guess. Like, where else? Like, if you're in a forest, where else are you gonna pee? You're gonna pee in like on the tree, like it's gonna soak it up in the roots. But like on the dog, that's not normally how it goes. So it's like, why would you pee on your dog? Trees may be just sent in a way alien to us. Oh, I completely agree. But then you also can't worry about if they cared about getting peed on, for that matter, because then you're really worrying about like that's really anthropomorphic to care about getting peed on. Like if they're sentient, yes, but why should you think that they care about being peed on like we care about being peed on? Because that would be attributing them human cares. So that's the thing. It's like you can look at stuff, but like you got to be careful. Like they may not care about the same things we do at all in the same way. So, all right, let's see who is up.